Hey friends, welcome back to the show. Thanks for being here. Hey, this is kind of a special, actually really two-part series that we're doing. I'm sure, like me, you saw what happened on Saturday with the U.S. bombing Iran, and we're all kind of freaking out, right? We're all like, what is going on? How did we get here? How did we make sense of this? And really, in my opinion, there are two layers that we have to unpack on the New Evangelicals. There is the actual history of Israel, America, Iran, that relationship and how it all has kind of shaken out to get us to this point. And there's also the evangelical theology of Christian nationalism and rapture ideology and biblical prophecy, term used very loosely, that has shaped U.S. foreign policy. So we're doing a two-part series, and I'm here to release the first part of it right now. I had guest Kevin Carnahan join me. He's phenomenal. He joined me for our four-part series on Israel and Palestine. You can go back and find that episode from 2023, October 2023, actually. And I just asked him, hey, can you give me and the audience kind of a crash course on the history of what got us to this point between Israel, America, and Iran? That's exactly what he does. So I really hope that you enjoy this conversation. Please leave a comment. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Like this video. Would love all of your thoughts. Yeah, I would love all your thoughts on this topic and this conversation. And if you want more of these kinds of deep dives, so let me know. Talk to y'all later on. Enjoy it. All right, sweet. Kevin Carnahan, at this point, you're almost a co-host of the show. You're on so much. It's good to see you, my friend. How are you?
Good.
Good. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience. I'm sure we have some new faces here. Who are you and what do you do?
So I'm Kevin Carnahan. I'm professor of philosophy and religion at Central Methodist University. Ooh, I'm also the chair of the humanities division. They gave me that job. I didn't want it, but they gave it to me anyway. And former co-editor of the Journal of the Society of Christian Ethics. I've written several books, most recently The Disappearance of Eve and the Gender of Christ, although probably most relevant here are the books that I wrote before that, which are on political theory and just war thinking. And so I do a lot of work in political theology, especially in an area called Christian realism, which is a line of kind of Augustinian thought. There's a fancy name for it, associated with the 4th century Bishop Augustine and the more contemporary figure, a guy named Reinhold Niebuhr. And basically, this is a kind of political theology that approaches the world as a set of interactions between sinners. So as you approach all of these countries, we're going to talk today about Iran and Israel and the United States. One of the presuppositions is okay, everybody's screwing up at some point, right? There are no pure good guys or bad guys. There's a complex world in which lots of people are trying to get their own interests, and often there are tragic, complications and conflicts. So that's the background that I bring to the analysis of everyday political situations.
Which I really appreciate because we live in such a clickbait, headline-driven, binary news cycle, and things are complicated, right? History is complicated. How nations become who they are is complicated. How they get entangled with other nations is complicated. And you're right. I mean, everyone, there's no one innocent in these kinds of stories. I brought you on over a year and a half ago now, when October 7th happened, and we did a four-part series. You were the first person in that lineup, just kind of giving us the backstory of how did we get to a place between Palestine and Israel? What's some of the narrative there? And it was really helpful. Actually, one of our most downloaded episodes. And so I brought you back today because obviously all of us are watching the news. We saw what happened as of this past week, where the Trump administration launched a surprise bombing on Iran. They went after some of their nuclear sites. In the news, we were reading stories before this that Trump was going to give Iran 2 weeks. They were trying to do negotiations. Then all of a sudden, I'm at my parents' house. We're driving back from the boardwalk in Ocean City, New Jersey, which is close to where I live, and I get a news flash on my phone. We've bombed Iran. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And before that, we saw Israel, from my estimation, just seemingly randomly start launching missiles into Iran. Iran fired back into Israel. And I'm like, wow, okay, what is going on here? So I'm bringing you on to kind of give us the lay of the land of how we got to this point, because I'm going to kind of just say the narrative I've been taught, and then kind of let you start filling in the blanks. So essentially what I was taught and what I come to know about the world is that, every nation around Israel absolutely hates Israel. They want to see Israel wiped off the face of the map. Iran is one of the biggest, states of sponsored terrorism. They routinely fund different groups and radical groups that have committed mass acts of violence in the U.S. and in other countries. And they want a nuclear weapon, and that they are probably close to getting one. I've heard that many times over the course of my life, that they are on the verge of getting one. And when I listened to talk radio, it was Obama was weak for trying to negotiate, that kind of vibe. And Iran bad, America and Israel good. And if it wasn't for God's hand and for America's hand of protection on Israel, it'd be completely obliterated, because every nation in the Middle East hates Jewish people and wants to see Israel dead. That's what I was taught, honestly.
Yeah, and that's a little bit of an oversimplification. Let's say that. So what we're going to find is a really complicated situation in which even the founding of Israel is kind of problematic, in which, Iran has participated in a lot of acts of kind of sabotage and terrorism, and so has Israel. These are not things that are exclusive to any one country. And these are conflicts, the dynamics of which go back about 100 years in order to understand how the United States plays in here, how they get their relationship with Iran, how Israel gets its particular relationship with Iran, how that evolves over time. All of it's really complicated. And I should say another thing about the Christian realist point of view, which is that the Christian realism rejects the sacralization of politics, rejects the idea that, say, God's providence can be associated with any particular state or any particular nation or any particular empire. Going back to Augustine was writing during the fall of the Roman Empire, and part of his whole point was that Christians who had tied God's hand to the Roman Empire had done it wrong, right? That
sounds familiar, Kevin. I'm not going to lie. It sounds familiar.
That he, as he said, right, all empires, all nations, all of these things are human constructs, and they're all partially sinful, partially good, and we can expect that they'll rise, that they'll fall, and that none of this will make a great deal of difference to God and how God is functioning in the world. So we're going to avoid trying to claim that God is on one side or the other side, or placing his hand of protection over any particular state. What we're going to focus on more is power. And there, it is true that one of the repetitive themes of Israel's existence in the Middle East has been that everybody underestimates Israel's power. And this is a theme that we see again and again, and this is the same theme that we see working out today. In many ways, Israel, so going back to October 7th, there was this conflict with the Palestinians, and a lot of the countries around them got upset about that and started attacking Israel, and again underestimated the power that Israel had and its ability to strike back. And so we see some of that working out today, not the hand of God, but very much the hand of modern military technology and the ability to mobilize that technology effectively.
Okay, that's helpful. So let's start kind of from the beginning. Israel, as we understand it today, was formed, was it 1946, 1948?
1947.
47.
You hit right around it. You were exactly around it. I would suggest that we go back a little bit further and a slightly different direction to start.
Let's do it.
So let's start out after World War II. Okay, World War II. Basically, the Allied powers take over what we know as the Middle East. right?
So really quick. So I think that a lot of people don't realize that, including myself. So World War II, it sounds like, was a huge rearranging of how we understand our geography today, nations, countries, boundaries, all that stuff, because of the end result of World War II. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. I mean, this is a place where the Ottoman Empire controlled most of the Middle East. Iran was an independent nation, but everybody, the Ottomans and the Iranians, both bet on the wrong horse in World War II. They both made connections with Germany, and when Germany lost, they lost. And the Allied powers basically came in and carved up the Middle East and set up new governments in all of these different places. Now, in Iran, what they did was they went in and they established a guy named Mohammad Reza Pahlavi as the Shah, the king of Iran. And this was a guy who was like in the royal line, but they got rid of his father as the king because he had made bad decisions during World War II, and they replaced him with his son, who the Allies more immediately controlled.
Okay.
Now, important against the background against which we should understand a lot of this happening is oil. Because at the time of World War II, right, the oil economy is everything. Access to oil means the ability to progress. Right. And Iran's history is caught up in being a great source of oil. It produces a massive amount of oil. But as of the turn to the 20th century, it didn't really have the ability to use that oil itself or to produce that oil itself. It didn't have the technology to do those things. And so part of what we see in Iran is it keeps getting handed around between different other countries that want to control it and want to control its oil. Right. And so after World War II, they set up the Shah in Iran, and Britain comes in and takes over oil production in Iran. Right.
The British again, Kevin.
The British, British colonialism. Man. We can.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, again, a very, very similar to what we saw in Israel, where Britain was. However, in this case, we're going to get the U.S. more involved
Noted.
As we go. Okay, so first thing we need to know is after World War II, they establish a kind of authoritarian dictator, right? However, he's limited. He's limited because
the Allies do this. So I'm sorry to cut you off. I want to make sure I understand. The Allies set up an authoritarian dictatorship in Iran.
Yeah. Okay. So they set up this guy, the Shah, as the king. However, at the beginning, he's limited. He's limited because they live in a constitutional monarchy, which means that he's the monarch, but they have an elected prime minister and an elected Congress. And this leads to problems because by 1951, the Iranian people decide they don't like Britain coming in and making all of the proceeds and taking all of the oil out.
Yes, my understanding is that, I'm sorry, again, I don't mean to interrupt audience, I'm just trying to fill in the blanks here, and also from my limited understanding, I'm also under the impression that there was some joint oil refinery program, but essentially the British kept like 80-something% of the profits, while the Iranian people did not. Is that correct?
So, yes. And it's also true that the British wanted to oversee the oil production, but not give any of the training on how to do that to the Iranians. They didn't want the Iranians to have the ability to take over this production for themselves. And no doubt that's a bad deal for the Iranian people.
Right.
So 1951, there is the election of a Congress and a prime minister who want to nationalize the oil production in Iran. They want the government and the state to take over, kick the British out, and start producing their own. The problem with this in its immediate context is this is during the Cold War. So the nationalization of oil production sounds a lot like communism. And you put that together with kicking the British out, and it sounds to Western people like, oh, maybe Iran is moving towards communism. Maybe they're moving towards the Soviet Union, right? Which is the greatest sin you could commit towards the West during the Cold War.
Yeah.
So the United States decides at that point, we can't let this happen. And they hand off to the CIA, right, to make sure that this elected prime minister and the elected Congress in Iran don't get what they want. And by 1953, the CIA engineers a coup in Iran that deposes the prime minister, takes away the powers of Congress there, and hands all of the power to the Shah, which is the person that they really controlled, the king that was before this limited by a constitutional monarchy. They basically get rid of the constitutional part of the monarchy and just establish the Shah in power.
I'm raising my hand for those who can't see
Yes.
it. That's my new way of interrupting you politely.
Go ahead.
Wait, so what you're telling me is that the U.S. government, the land of the, what is it? Land of the free, home of the brave.
Home of the brave.
We went over to another sovereign nation to kind of topple their election or their political system to install someone that we could control, not the Iranian people.
Yeah. I mean, the United States during the Cold War was much more in favor of the Western ideology of like capitalism, anti-communism than it was in democracy. And if democracy might have led you towards communism, yeah, it was an immediate choice by the American government. We're going to go in and flip you. I mean, this is America's consistent foreign policy in the Middle East, in South America. And one of the things that continues to cause us problems all around the world is lots of the places that we propped up right-wing dictators in order to fight communism. Right. And this is, again, I mean, communism wasn't good.
Sure.
But there are a lot of decisions that are made at this point that are certainly not respective to the people that actually live in these countries that are being treated as pawns between the Soviet Union and the Western powers. So it's not good. It's a mess. And this gives a lot of the background to Iran's relationship with the United States.
It just seems like, this is, again, we talked about Israel and Palestine before. It just seems like the U.S. and the Western world has been using a lot of countries in the Middle East as little chess pawns to kind of move things around. And at some point, people are going to get real pissed off that other countries are meddling in elections or meddling in policies or are using their their power and might to strong arm smaller countries into doing certain things that they don't want to. I could see how this could make a lot of people in the Middle East incredibly resentful of America and other countries that we're allied with.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, I mean, the Soviet Union was doing exactly the same thing if they could get it, right?
Sure,
so,
of course.
Oftentimes, this is just true. For countries that don't have a great deal of power, their only choice is who to be a pawn of. So they can like try and become a pawn of the Soviet Union, or they can try and become a pawn of the West. But the idea that they have their own autonomy is really a kind of illusion. And this will eventually drive exactly the nuclear proliferation that we see as a problem today, because countries want to have their own power and want to have their own autonomy. And they know that one of the ways to get that is to get nuclear weapons. If you have nuclear weapons, then you aren't just a pawn to somebody else. So this is one of the motivations for many countries. If you look at North Korea, if you look at Iran, and like, why do they want to develop, their nuclear capabilities? It's exactly because they don't want to be just pawns to all of these other countries that do have nuclear weapons, do have great powers, and would like to push them around. Now, there's a deep irony here, though, because once the United States put the right-wing dictator, the Shah of Iran, in charge, the United States started Iran's nuclear program.
Wait, I'm sorry. Wait, what? What?
Yeah, so in the 1950s, the United States, again, in the context of the Cold War, they wanted to like win over as many of these countries as possible, keep them from going over to the Soviet Union. So one of the incentives that they developed was what was called Atoms for Peace. They would help countries develop their own nuclear energy programs as a kind of benefit of being related to the United States. So it's under the Shah in the 1950s that the atomic program in Iran starts, in part because he's friendly to the United States. He's under the control of the United States.
Right.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong?
I can't imagine that anything would fall into place, except that you're ignoring the will of the people of Iran, right? So, and as things go with the Shah, if those who are in favor of the Shah will say, well, he modernized the country, he brought about, kind of modern Western technology and things like that, which is to some extent true. But if you're a member of the people of Iran, he was secular, he was not Muslim. Iran is overwhelmingly Shiite Muslim. He opposed things like women wearing face veils, and when women wanted to wear face veils, he at times sent out soldiers who would rip the veils off of women in public in order to enforce secularism on the populace. So a lot of the people in Iran just perceive this as an oppressive right-wing Western government, and they don't like it.
I mean, one way to think about this for our audience, right, is we do hear we hear now from Christian nationalists about the boogeyman of secularization, right? And this is what we actually exported that over to a country, right, where that actually happened, which is again just wild. It's wild to think about. Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the famous images that pushed the Iranian Revolution was soldiers pulling the face veils off of women using the bayonets on their guns, that they would swipe off the veil that the women had on.
Really?
Now, all of this leads in 1979 to a revolution by the Iranian people against the Shah in Iran. Now, the revolution is an incredibly diverse thing. Everybody hates the Shah. Everybody in Iran doesn't, whether you're a kind of progressive, whether you are a regressive, whether you're in favor of a kind of strictly Islamic state, everybody hates the Shah. And so they come together and they rise up and they get rid of the Shah. But the United States is the one propping the Shah up. And so the United States ends up on, in the Iranian Revolution, what the people of Iran see as clearly the wrong side. And the Iranian Revolution actually takes as hostages all of the people in the U.S. government that are still in Iran. And so there are a large number of U.S. hostages that are taken, and this is what's known as the Iranian hostage crisis of the 1979 and the next couple of years, as those hostages get held on. Now, this is really deep for understanding the relationship between the United States and Iran, because for the United States, this paints Iran as these backward-thinking, hostage-taking, horrible people. And Iran thinks of the United States as the person that's been propping up a right-wing dictator against them this entire time. This also ends up affecting the United States and United States politics, as Jimmy Carter is president when the Iranian Revolution takes place, and he looks particularly weak given that the hostages have been taken on his watch, and Carter isn't able to get the hostages released, in part because his opponent in the election is talking to Iran behind his back and telling them that they should hold off releasing the hostages until he gets elected president.
What?
So that is a guy named Ronald Reagan.
No, wait! I thought Ronald Reagan was the best president in the history of ever, Kevin. I mean, I listened to Sean Hannity as a child, and he insisted Reagan fixed everything.
So, yes, so Ronald Reagan is talking to the Iranians and saying, look, don't let the American hostages go, because as long as you hold on to them, then Carter looks weak. I'll get elected president. I'll give you a better deal than Carter would have, and then we'll be able to go forward. Now, that's add to this, like there's a gas crisis at the same time. Carter loses. Reagan comes into office. When Reagan gets into office, the hostages are released, thus contributing to the kind of mythology of Ronald Reagan. He was the person who could get the hostages released, despite the fact that he actually was kind of behind the scenes trying to get them held on to that point. And then his deal with Iran really evolves into the relationship that produces the Iran-Contra affair, which is that the U.S. government wants to fund anti-communist rebellions in South America, but they are banned by the U.S. Congress for sending any tax funds to support that. And so they decide to secretly sell weapons to Iran in order to make money that they can then send to support these anti-communist revolutions in South America. And so if anybody remembers, like way back, like Oliver North, who is still like a big guy in right-wing circles, has his own like thing on Fox and is a big commentator. He was the general that was like ultimately behind this entirely illegal process of engaging with Iran and selling them weapons, which was against the law, in order to make money and send money down to anti-communist revolutionaries, which was against the law. And there was this whole blow up during Reagan's administration about whether Reagan knew any of this. And like it ended up basically tracing to Oliver North. He got found guilty of it, although it got thrown out on technicalities. And ever since then, he's been a big guy on the right. They all love him because he was willing to do what was necessary against the communists at the time in the Cold War.
By selling Iran weapons illegally.
By selling Iran weapons illegally and using that to fund rebellions in South America, which were also, the same kind of thing that America had done in Iran that in part got it into the problem to start.
Right.
So that's the background for Iran's relationship with the United States. There's a lot of things that go on after that, but this is the big thing that if you ever see the quotes from the Ayatollah Khomeini, so this is the guy that eventually came in to Iran. He is a religious leader in Shiism, and he established himself after the revolution as the supreme leader in Iran, and I'll say a bit about that in a minute. But you'll see quotes from him where he like calls America the great Satan, and basically they picture America as this evil. That goes back to this narrative in Iran of America was responsible for installing the Shah that was so oppressive to us. And the founding of our nation is found in the Iranian Revolution, where we finally threw off the shackles of the United States in order to take back our autonomy.
So if we're just putting on their glasses for a minute, essentially what they're saying is like, look, the U.S. government has meddled in our country for a long time, done a lot of damage, and they continue to do things that really hurt our national interests and our people. And so for us, they are one of our biggest enemies because of what they've done to our country, essentially, overthrowing the government, the coup attempts, the whole thing with the British and the oil, agreement that was super unfair, all that stuff, right? The U.S. has kind of either allowed or been part of directly. And so for us, these are the people that we think are the bad guys, right? This is our enemy because of what they've done to our country.
Yep. However, I mean, we shouldn't either cast Iran as like a great person in the end of this, right? A great nation in the end of it. What happens at the end of the revolution is that the revolution, as I said, was a great mixture of people. It was progressives, it was Islamists, it was a whole bunch of different parts of society. but it ends up being a particular Shia Islamist faction that ends up taking over Iran at the end of the revolution. And this guy, the Ayatollah Khomeini, who is a Shia scholar and religious leader, establishes himself kind of de facto as the new king of Iran. And he embraces a kind of government that's split. So on the one hand, again, they will have an elected leader, an elected prime minister. They will have an elected House of Representatives. But behind that is the Ayatollah, who basically sets the boundaries for what the elected government can do. So he will say, okay, if the government gets too in favor of engagement with the West, he'll draw a line and say, no, we shouldn't be doing that. Now, this means that while Iran does have a kind of democratic face to their government, they also have a kind of autocratic, dictatorial part of their government that ultimately makes decisions. And so there's some freedom within the elected part of the government, but it's severely limited by the Ayatollah and other religious leaders that exist in the background. Often in the United States, they call this the shadow government of Iran, because they think of it as the religious government that's really behind everything that's going on in Iran. Now, over time, that has led to some really interesting dynamics, because sometimes the people of Iran will elect people that are relatively progressive, relatively interested in, Western values and things like that. And that can lead to conflicts between the prime minister and the Ayatollah, and they have to deal with that. Sometimes if you get a particularly anti-Western move, if the United States has done something that the Iranian people don't like, they will then elect a prime minister that is very much more conservative and anti-American, anti-Western. And so you have a whole history of kind of divergences there and possibilities of kind of reforming Iran that Western people were excited about, but it doesn't ever come to fruition in terms of a very significant kind of reformation of Iranian society or anything like a move towards the West. So basically, there's beef between America and Iran on both sides. America will look at Iran as kind of evil representative of a religious monarchy, exactly the kind of thing that the United States doesn't like. Iran will look at the United States as the people that did a coup and took over their country and made it a right-wing dictatorship at one point, and they cast that off. So those are the two narratives that you have going on between those countries.
Okay, that's helpful. What about Israel? Where's Israel in all of this? And I do want to hear from you around the concept or the narrative that Iran is a massive state that is sponsoring all kinds of acts of terror across the globe, and that they hate Jews and hate Israel. Get into that a little bit. What's the dynamic going on? But during all this, obviously Israel is there. It's backed by the U.S. What's going on between these three countries during that time?
Yeah. So 1947, Israel is established in the Middle East. And pretty much that is universally looked down upon by everybody else in the Middle East. Everybody else in the Middle East sees it not as the movement of the refugees from the Holocaust coming into the Middle East to find a home that they can live in. They view it as a Western group of people, a group of people from Europe coming in and stealing land away from the people who lived in Palestine prior to the founding of the State of Israel. Now, you and I have talked about that in the past. That's a complicated story. Right. Of its own. But we should know that there's two narratives about this. There's the narrative that Israel will tell about itself, that it's made up of the refugees from the Holocaust that are simply trying to survive, and this is its national narrative. And then there's the story of Israel coming in, being established, and taking away the land from the Palestinian people, both of which have some truth to them, right? But the idea that Israel is a kind of manifestation of the West, it is supported by America, it is America's strongest ally in the region, all of these things will immediately make Iran an enemy of Israel. Now, during the time that the Shah was around, of course, this isn't a problem because he's basically controlled by the United States anyway. He's not going to make any problem of it. But when Iran changes over after the revolution into this kind of Shia government, one of the things governments always need is enemies. The United States is a perfectly good enemy, but they're way too far away. Iran can't do much to them, right? So you want enemies that are closer in order to build this national narrative. And Iran, as part of their narrative, then embraces the idea that Israel is this manifestation of the United States, of the West, very near their borders. And so they embrace the rhetoric of, which is very common in the region, the rhetoric of wiping Israel off the map, right? Talking about getting rid of Israel, kicking the Israelis out of the Middle East because they see them as an occupying force from Europe that has come in. Now, important to put that in context. Again, this is what just about everybody else in the region says. And at the time, in like 1979, Iran has no power to actually act on this. They have much more immediate problems in terms of their relationship with Iraq, which is right next door. And Iran and Iraq have a conflict because one of them is Shia, and at the time, the other one is Sunni. It's run by Saddam Hussein, who hopefully Americans will remember. And Shia and Sunni don't particularly like each other. So Iran's most immediate issue is with Iraq. And Iran just doesn't have the power to project much trouble for Israel at the time in the 1970s. So during the time that their rhetoric was most heated, they're actually the least effective in being able to do anything about it. They talk really big, but they don't have much actual power. Now, that changes. In 2003, that changes, primarily for two reasons. One is the United States comes in and we take out Saddam Hussein in Iraq, which immediately removes Iran's closest opponent and immediate enemy. Right? It turns so in Iraq, the majority of people, or the plurality of people, are actually Shia. And so a much more friendly government to Iran comes in Iraq, and Iran is able to actually expand its power. One of the great effects of the United States going in and taking over Iraq is actually to make Iran a huge power. Iran had always been offset by Iraq and kept as like a little regional power, always engaged in power play between those two. But when the United States goes in and takes Iraq out, all of a sudden Iran has the space to expand its power, and it does. It starts expanding its power through Iraq into Syria, into Lebanon, and creates eventually a structure that's called the Shia Crescent across the top of the Middle East. Really, Iran has ties to all of these different regimes and terrorist organizations in all of these areas. And this is really the groundwork for it is really, again, laid by the United States in going in and taking Iran out as their immediate enemy. And so this allows them to project force, which they will, mostly through proxies like Hezbollah, which exists in Lebanon, that will attack Israel from the north occasionally with like rocket attacks, by Bashar al-Assad in Syria, who is Alawite. It's a kind of version of Shiism. I don't want to get into the complications of Islamic sociology. But he is in control of Syria, and he will also be able to attack Israel. So Iran can't they don't directly attack Israel, but they now have ways to get at Israel that they didn't before 2003. And this is where we definitely see. So when you hear those stories about, well, they are the greatest sponsor of terrorism in the Middle East,
right.
What this is talking about is what the Iranians would see as their correct expansion of power over Shiite areas in order to create a conglomeration of different regimes that can stand for their own autonomy in the Middle East. And they see that as linked to. Now, notably, during this time, they aren't as aggressive with their rhetoric towards Israel. You'll hear things every once in a while. But really, it was, again, primarily during the time that they didn't have the power to do this, that they were the most aggressive and where you'll find kind of the most extreme claims about Israel. So I think probably the easiest way to think about this in terms of international affairs is like it's standard power politics. Every country wants to expand its power. Every other country doesn't want, their neighbors expanding their power. And so we end up in a game where they're all trying to make moves to see how much power they can get, how much they can expand without breaking the system or getting themselves in trouble. Iran played that game very well from about 2003 until 2020 or so, at which point they're going to face a big problem. So the first thing that changes for Iran ability to expand power is the United States coming in and knocking out Iraq. The second thing that raises the power of Iran is that it's revealed in 2002 that Iran has been developing their nuclear program.
Which was given to them by the U.S., is that correct?
Which was given to them by the U.S. as a nuclear energy program.
Oh, nuclear energy. Okay, got it.
As a nuclear energy program. And what they've been doing is they've been increasing their ability to refine this nuclear material in the direction that could be leading to the development of a nuclear weapon.
Do you think, sorry, hand raised, Professor Kevin, question. Do you think that if Iran got a nuclear warhead, would they absolutely use it? Like do you, based on what you know, do you think that they're just waiting to get this thing so they can launch it towards Israel or launch it towards the U.S.? Is that what they want? Or is it more about the deterrent of, hey, we have this now, so get the hell out of our region, because if not, we're going to threaten to use it, but we don't want to use it?
Right. I mean, this is kind of the question, how insane are they, right? Because this is the, you don't want a person who has apocalyptic hopes having a nuclear weapon, right? Anybody who wants to bring about the end of the world, you definitely don't want them having a nuclear weapon. I know at points, that ends up being the United States.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Exactly. I'm like, ever heard of the rapture?
Right.
Yeah, no, I get you, though. I get you.
So, I mean, the inner workings of Iran are extremely hard for us to get to their ultimate reasoning about anything. So let me answer by answering another question, which is, are they developing a nuclear bomb, right? So at the same time, as this is revealed that they've been refining this nuclear material, Iran comes out and says, no, look, we've got some stuff we've been doing, right? I mean, basically they got caught. But they explicitly say, we're not developing a nuclear bomb. And the Ayatollah, the guy who is the kind of supreme leader that's behind everything, puts out a fatwa, publicizes it in 2003, that says it is against Islamic law to deploy a nuclear weapon. It is against Islamic law to have nuclear weapons. And if you were to go into Islamic jurisprudence, there's actually a fairly good argument for this in Islam. Islam, ironically, for what lots of Westerners tend to think about it, has a long history of finding that anything that targets women and children, non-combatants, is not acceptable under Sharia law. Now, I know in the West, the primary thing that we often think about is like Osama bin Laden and the September 11th attacks. This is one of the biggest reasons that most of the Muslim world did not approve of September 11th, was exactly because traditional Sharia law in Islam says you can't target civilians. That is one of the basic standards in Islamic law. And so there is a tradition of thinking, okay, so nuclear weapons, what are they good for? They're
Right.
not good for targeting soldiers. They're good for leveling cities.
Yes.
Therefore, under Islamic law, there's a fairly good argument that nuclear weapons are not the kind of thing you should have. All right. So theoretically, that's great. He comes out, he says it's against Islamic law for us even to develop a nuclear weapon. We're not developing a nuclear weapon. We're advancing our nuclear capabilities. Now, here's the thing. Nobody in the West believes him.
Okay.
And there have been lots of analyses of that, right? To say, okay, is this, he could change his fatwa. Fatwas might not be permanent. And he's still around. So he could presumably just take it back at some point. Some people suggest that there are Islamic qualifications that if you're dealing with an untrustworthy enemy, you could lie to them under Islamic law. And so some people say, oh, this is really an instance where he's really not representing his own position truthfully. Most Westerners don't take that to be an absolute statement on it that we should trust entirely, and I wouldn't want to trust it entirely.
Okay.
What I can say is this: from this point, what you see Iran doing is developing in the direction that they could have a nuclear weapon. Okay, they continue to refine their nuclear products more and more, to the point that they could produce a kind of weapons grade uranium. Now, why do they do that? And this gets back to the question that you wanted to ask. One way of reading that is to say they don't actually want to build a nuclear bomb, but they want the deterrent effect of having a nuclear bomb.
Right.
So they want to be able to say, look, we're not building a nuclear bomb, but we want you to know that we could. Right? We want you to know that if you come and attack us, we're not very far from it. So that this should stop you from attacking us. This is a kind of deterrent all by itself without producing a nuclear bomb.
Right.
We're just going to keep working on it and get closer to it. That's fine. That's within the Islamic law, right? So we don't conflict anything there, but we're not going to build a bomb. Because it is true that from 2003, I mean, despite the fact that Israel says about every other year that Iran is going to be able to build a bomb in the next few months, nobody claims that Iran has built a nuclear bomb. And nobody claims that Iran is actually imminently, right on the edge of being able to build a nuclear bomb. The constant drumbeat is just they're moving in that direction. They're refining the materials. They're doing this. Now, that speaks to, then, if that's the right way to read Iran, then that would suggest that they are rational actors. They're not people that are pursuing the end of the world by blowing everything up, or the destruction of Israel by getting that right. That's how I tend to read Iran, is to say they are rational actors, and as a matter of fact, they've been fairly restrained in the sense that while they want to show the capability, they aren't moving as North Korea has, all the way to building a nuclear stockpile. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that we might have taught them in this last round of attacks is, if you're going to go there, you have to build a nuclear bomb. You don't stop short of it, because if you stop short of it, we can always come and attack you, right? And that's one of the unfortunate things that they might learn from this, is if that reading is right, that they thought, if we just have the capability, if we just have the nuclear capability, that'll be sufficient deterrent, then we might have taught them that that's not sufficient deterrent and they will need to build a bomb.
Okay, so I feel like we're kind of up to the 2010s, like the mid 2000s. Again, this is where I start having memories now of hearing about Iran's nuclear program and how they're getting closer and closer, and we have to do all this different stuff. So my impression is that essentially various presidents work to try and negotiate different terms and conditions related to, hey, if you halt this program and you're open to international international inspectors doing random audits, and we will release some sanctions so you can start doing more trade, and then, therefore make your country more prosperous. And this essentially happens through, and again, I could be wrong here, through the Obama administration, where they get to a point where, hey, there is an agreement in place. We are able to inspect their nuclear facilities whenever we want to, and in return for that, we're going to loosen some of our sanctions with how we deal with you as a country economically, and we'll kind of move forward from there. Is that correct?
Yeah. So 2015, there are multilateral negotiations with Iran. Lots of countries getting involved. The United Nations getting involved, and there is an agreement that's put in place in 2015 that basically does those things that you said. At least ideally, the idea is we'll release some money to you. You'll be able to have more open trade. In exchange, we'll be able to come in, observe what you're doing, and make sure that you're not, in fact, building a bomb. Right?
Okay.
Now, this gets put in place in 2015. The immediate question, as with all of this, is about trustworthiness.
Of course. Right. Yes. Right.
So the question moving forward from here is Iran actually giving the West access to their entire nuclear program, or are they building parts of their nuclear program where the United States and the West can't see and actually continuing to develop? So from 2015, you really get two camps on this. There's one that says, look, this is the best situation we've had. We might be able to establish an enduring peace where Iran doesn't build a nuclear bomb, and yet we become more respectful of Iran's autonomy. And that's the kind of pro-agreement side. The anti-agreement side is driven primarily by Israel and kind of conservative right-wing politicians in the United States. And their claims are, we can't trust Iran. You've got to know Iran is not actually obeying this. They're actually going around behind your back and developing nuclear weapons. So through the Obama administration, the pro-nuclear agreement side has control. But of course, 2016, I don't even want to think about it, but Trump gets elected. Yeah. And of course, at that point, the opposite side comes into power. Israel makes a set of claims that Iran is hiding parts of their nuclear program. Trump accepts this on its face and unilaterally backs out of the agreement with Iran. Which is to say, I mean, not even engaging any of those other players, the United Nations or anybody else who had been a part of the agreement. Trump just declares that he is no longer going to recognize the agreement with Iran. At which point, of course, Iran says, okay, fine, then you've got to know we're going to continue to develop our nuclear capacities, right? Yeah.
Okay. Question time. Look, I want to, this kind of episode, I'm just trying to get the data, and I'm not trying to read too much into it. People already know how I think about Trump and MAGA, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But, what would be the logic for Trump to pull out? Because obviously, if there was an agreement, that's better than no agreement. Was there a backup plan? Like the people who were whispering in Trump's ear that, you can't trust Iran, they're not listening, that, you have to back out. Were they giving him a different alternative? Like, hey, we should do this instead. Or was it just back out and let's see what the hell happens?
I think you're seeing the alternative right now. Oh. I think that you're seeing the alternative plan played out in let's just bomb Iran out of a nuclear program. So we're not good. You don't have to trust Iran if you bomb them. And
we have the bigger stick, right? We have the bigger stick. So why not?
Yeah. I mean, this is the deal. Now, I don't think in Trump's first term, I think, number one, we had just gotten out of Iraq. Trump was in part limited in what he wanted to do in international. And Trump had in his first term a lot more limits on him than he does in his current term. He had enough people within the military, within the White House, that would kind of listen to him get angry and express
Right.
all these crazy ideas about what he wanted to do, but then would say, okay, here's what we're really going to do. And so they limited him. So I think that he was not able to carry that through during his first term, but part of his project during his second term has been doing all the stuff he really wanted to do during his first term, but people said, maybe that's not a great idea to go ahead and act on that.
Did the Biden administration go back into those agreements, or were they even on the table after the Trump? Like what happened in between?
Yeah. So the Biden administration did not make much progress on this issue at all. They didn't go back into the original. By that point, the agreements had broken down.
Right.
They needed to start over from scratch in order to set up those agreements and set that up. And it was never a priority for the Biden administration. I do think that the Biden administration did fall down on this issue. They should have paid more attention to it. Biden was, in part, trying to pivot from focusing on the Middle East to focusing on things like China and Russia in the Ukraine. And they tended to see those as the bigger issues that were happening in the world. And I think they took their eye off the ball a little bit in developing this. But I also would note that even if they had developed and spent 4 years trying to get a new agreement with Iran, there's no reason to think that Trump wouldn't just immediately have backed out of it when he became president again. So that's not an excuse for the Biden administration, but I think it is just a fact, a reality. Trump, when he came in, also talked about, of course, Trump loves talking about deals. And so he talked about making a deal with Iran and trying to get a deal with Iran. However, right. I mean, so the New York Times is reporting today that even from when Netanyahu suggested that they were going to take this route, Trump had basically signed off on it. So there are questions about how serious Trump had ever been about negotiations. And I think his history basically suggests he's not terribly interested in like long-term treaties or anything like that. He really thinks that everything is business deals, which is not very well suited to anything in international relations, which is its own problem.
Right. So okay, this is really helpful, and that brings us kind of to like the moment that we're in right now, right? So a few weeks ago, we saw breaking news: Israel launches missiles over at Iran, and Iran fires back, and they're going back and forth, and we're all like, what is happening? So what happened there? Was it just a random unprovoked attack from Israel just to start striking at Iran? Because does Israel equally hate Iran as much as Iran hates Israel? Like, are they just people who just hate each other, and first one to destroy the other one wins? Like what's going on with that?
So I would say that this is the end of a long-term strategy by Israel that they have worked very hard and incredibly successfully at executing, which is, so I mentioned that Iran had expanded its power through parts of Iraq into Syria, into Lebanon, and they developed relationships with Hamas down in Israel, which is a little bit weird because Hamas is not Shia. I asked a guy at Al-Quds University once, like, why is there this relationship with Iran? And he was like, well, some of politics is just practical. That was his answer. Like Hamas, like the Palestinian people will take support from wherever we can get it, right? We're not worried if you're Shia or if you're Sunni, but they developed this out. Now, Israel would like to collapse that entire structure back to the point that it only has to worry about Iran, right? And so October 7th happens, and this allows Israel to start at the end of that chain and move its way backwards through the chain of power. So, I mean, I don't think we need to cover here the Hamas and what happened to Hamas after October 7th. The developing genocide in Gaza basically collapses Hamas's power to attack against Israel. It's also important to note here, you will hear people associate and say, well, Israel is really responding to October 7th with all of this. Iran was not like behind October 7th. At most, the Hamas had shared with Iran that they had hopes of attacking Israel at some point, and Iran had said, that sounds cool. We'd like let us know what happens with that.
Yeah, right. Keep me posted.
Keep me posted. That was about what Iran and Hamas had going on. But what that does is it starts a larger conflict, because now Israel is attacking Hamas and attacking Gaza, and Iran and its allies want to provide support for the Gazans. And so Hezbollah, which is the kind of Shia group up in Lebanon to the north of Israel, they start launching rockets into Israel from the north. This is where we get back to that theme of underestimating Israel, because they launch attacks into Israel. They don't have a great effect, as often happens with this. When people attack Israel, Israel has immensely good defenses. And so Israel isn't hurt by this, but this gives Israel a reason to go in and take out Hezbollah. And so they first set off a set of the people from Hezbollah were communicating with pagers. They were like living in the 1980s, right? They thought that this was a safe way for them to communicate, that Israel couldn't tap into what was going on. But Israel actually developed over a long period of time these explosive pagers that it sold to Hezbollah. I remember this
story.
And it sets off a series of explosions across Lebanon, where all these people from Hezbollah are basically taken out. And then Israel invades Lebanon. And they basically take out Hezbollah. So that's, again, we start by taking out Hamas, move back into the Shia crescent with Hezbollah. Fortunately for Israel, I guess, at this point, in Syria, Bashar al-Assad had been fighting a civil war that had been going on since the Obama administration. He was toppled by the populace of his own country about the same time that all of this is happening. So he loses power. Iran all of a sudden starts seeing the work that it's done expanding its own power over the last 2 decades collapsing back towards Iran. Iran is losing more and more power. At the same time, like, Israel is attacking Iran in all sorts. So when you hear that Iran is the greatest sponsor of terrorism in the Middle East, you should remember that everybody's doing it. Israel has targeted assassinations of scientists in Iran's nuclear program. Israel occasionally goes over and bombs places in Iran that it thinks are nuclear sites. So when you get to Iran, finally, it was after. So in April 1st, Israel demolished the Iranian consulate in Syria. Okay. And Iran reacts by this massive attack of 300 missiles that it shoots towards Israel. Now, again, Israel has what it calls the Iron Dome, which is this system that basically shoots down missiles that come to it. So Israel doesn't suffer any major losses during this. But for Israel, this is, again, you've underestimated the power of Israel. Israel says, okay, fine. Now we're going to attack Iran, and we're tired of all the, we don't want them ever developing a nuclear weapon. So they try and bring evidence to the United States to try and convince the United States one more time. Iran, as they say, Iran has this, they're developing a triggering mechanism. So they're really on the edge of developing a nuclear weapon. The United States intelligence services say, no, we don't believe that. This is not true. And all the way through, the intelligence services for the United States have said Iran is not, there's no evidence that they're developing a nuclear bomb in any immediate frame. But Israel takes this opportunity. Basically, they send out, and in a series of attacks against Iran, they neutralize Iran's air defenses. And so they are given free rein to basically bomb the junk out of Iran. At this point, they've only got one problem left, which is that Iran, as it's developed its nuclear weapons process, has developed refineries under mountains in Iran, which are like a mile underground, and Israel doesn't have anything that can reach these places. Now, at that point, you might be like, okay, so why is Israel doing this then? Why are they doing? And the only real rationale for this is that Israel hopes they can get America on board if they continue to expand out this conflict. If they make it a big enough conflict, they can get America to jump on board and go with them into attacking Iran. Now, if this had been any other administration, that would have been a silly hope, because the American intelligence services say, no, Iran is not developing a bomb. The UN says there's no evidence that Iran is imminently developing a bomb. This is not, the U.S. really, even if Iran was developing a bomb, the U.S. is not in any danger from it because they don't have missiles that could reach the U.S. So the U.S. has immediately no practical interest in this outside of just its relationship with Israel, and that Israel is kind of reacting to this. So, but we don't have any other administration.
Exactly.
We have the Trump administration.
Oh, my God.
And as I've said, I suspect that this fits into like what they saw as the realistic outcome of engaging with Iran on nuclear weapons anyway, because they just didn't trust Iran. They didn't have any interest in continuing the agreements with them, at which point the only other option really appears in the long run. If you don't want them to like have the capability to develop a nuclear weapon, you've got to bomb the junk out of them. And so this is what happens the other night, is that Trump, despite the fact that his own intelligence services are telling him that Iran doesn't have a bomb, won't imminently have a bomb, Trump approves the bombing of these mountain-based places, nuclear reactors, with what's called a bunker buster bomb.
Yeah, I've heard about this.
30,000 pound bomb that in theory can hit the mountain and will be enough to harm the nuclear reactor. We don't really know. I mean, we're not entirely sure how much damage it can do. We aren't sure how much damage it has done. But so that's the situation. I would say that the most recent attacks, you will see people call them a preemptive attack against Iran by Israel, or a preemptive attack. That's not the right category in like just war theory. A preemptive attack is when somebody is in the process, they are ready to launch an attack against you, and you attack them and stop them from launching the attack. Iran wasn't in the case of these nuclear weapons, Iran is not like on the edge of attacking you with them. They haven't developed a missile. The evidence is ambiguous as to whether they even want to develop a nuclear bomb. So this is really what in just war thought would be called a preventative attack, which is an attack of something that might or might not happen in the future. And in like just war thinking and just war ethics, that's usually not allowed because it's an attack based on fear, not on facts, right? So you don't have an imminent attack incoming or anything like that. You've got a fear that they might develop weapons that at some point in the future they could use in an attack, which is too far afield in most just war thinking to justify an attack against a country. But basically, this is the situation that we find ourselves in, where Israel has participated in this kind of attack, and America has then jumped on board to go along with them. And then the question is, what's going to happen next, and where do we go from here?
Okay. Wow. Yeah, no, this is a really helpful explanation, because to be honest with you, it makes sense when you say it like that, because I'm looking at this and I'm like, what is going on? I mean, obviously Trump, one of his big things was no new wars. I'm going to be the president of peace. Do you think this will lead us into some kind of larger escalation? I'm not sure what Iran can and can't do, but obviously they're not happy about it. I'm sure they're trying to think of what they can do in response. I'm sure there are other allied countries with Iran who are like, we're pretty ticked about this. Do you think that this will escalate and is only going to get worse? Like, how do you kind of read the room?
Right. So you see out there all these people who are like, we're entering World War III, and this is going to be really bad. And you see a lot of people who are, which we can talk about, kind of apocalyptic in theology that are excited about this opportunity.
Yeah, weird.
Yeah. So here's the deal. I don't see this evolving into a massive war that draws in other major players. The reason for that is that Iran is just too weak as it currently stands, and its allies are not in a place to come in and help it. So its primary ally, like the closest thing to a great power that it has on its side, would be Russia. But if we look at Russia right now, Russia is bogged down in Ukraine. It doesn't have a lot of extra resources to expend on something else. And I can't imagine that, especially with a president like Trump, that I think Putin believes that he has the ability, should we say, to manipulate? I don't know. That he thinks that he's got a relationship with Trump, right? And I don't think that Putin would want to throw that away over an issue with Iran, which I think from his perspective, he's got to just be thinking, well, you made a series of dumb decisions here. Like, Iran, you've kind of screwed this up. So I don't see Russia getting involved. People who are like China and all that. China has interests in the region primarily because of oil. It has ties to Iran. But again, if China is going to spend its military capital, it wants to take over Taiwan. It does not want to step in and like defend Iran over this and pick a fight with the United States over that. If China is going to pick a fight with the United States, it's going to be over things that are closer to China. Now, what can Iran do? They're in a very limited status. I mean, this is the thing: these strikes were a strike of opportunity for the United States and Israel. One of the reasons that they do it is because there's not the costs appear to be very low. You have an opportunity to go in, destroy nuclear sites, and you don't think Iran can do much back. Iran. Their options are they've talked about shutting down the Straits of Hormuz, which are nearby and which a lot of oil comes through. So they might be able to shut that down, which would make oil prices all over the world increase at exactly a time when Trump doesn't want inflation inside the United States. So that would be one way that they could do it. That would probably lead to a conflict over the Straits of Hormuz, where the United States might take military action then. And then the question is, how long could Iran hold out shutting down the Straits? And there are estimates from a couple weeks to a few months that Iran could do that. Now, that might be enough to affect the American economy, but again, it's fairly limited. The other thing is America has military bases all over the place in the Middle East. And while Israel has the Iron Dome that protects it from missiles, not all of those military bases of the United States have similar defenses that they would be able to fight off a missile attack from Iran. Now, part of that question comes back to like, how many more missiles does Iran have left after its exchange with Israel? How much capacity does it have to attack out? And is it willing to do that? Because realize that if you start killing American soldiers, Americans, really regardless of their political affiliation or anything else, get mad really fast.
100%.
And Americans will very quickly be willing to underwrite things that you wouldn't have imagined us being able to do. But we have the capability to do it, especially with those. And I mean, this is the thing, is that might actually be the worst scenario for the Trump administration, because that might lead to a place where the United States has to put boots on the ground in Iran, which ultimately
Ugh.
has not been a good situation for the United States. And it's exactly the kind of thing that Trump really has said he would not get us involved in.
Right.
The chances are, right, Iran loses that fight. So does the Iranian government want to inflict damage on the Trump administration bad enough that it's willing to give up
Right.
its own position by pushing this forward? Again, I tend to think that the Iranian regime are, at the end of the day, rational actors. They're not really interested in a suicidal plot that might get the United States bogged down in the Middle East again, but they'll never see the outcome of. So I think that's unlikely. But on the other hand, Iran's probably got to do something for their own populace. Like, their own populace is going to be like, we can't put up with this. This is an invasion of our autonomy. This is an attack on us as a people. And the other questions here also have to do with just how much was the United States successful? Because we don't know. Underneath that mountain, we don't know what the damage was.
Right.
Iran might make the decision that this is the point at which, if they have any capacity left, it's time to build a nuclear bomb. Because they might actually have, we don't know where all their nuclear material is kept. And so they might have stashes that are hidden from us that are nuclear grade capacity. And if they decide, if the situation is that, as such as I've described, that they're trying to build the capacity but not the bomb up to this point, and that this attack makes them believe, you know what, the capacity isn't enough, we need a nuclear bomb.
Right.
It might be that their next move is to see how fast can we do it in a month? Can we do it in a week? Can we do it, like, how fast can we produce something that we can blow up to show the world that we now do have nuclear capacity? So the irony of this is that there's a scenario in which it's entirely possible that this is the thing that actually spurs Iran to create a nuclear bomb.
It's almost like violence begets violence. You know, it's almost Jeez. I mean, I don't want to oversimplify things. I get how this is, like you so eloquently have explained over the past hour and change. This is a complicated situation with a lot of history and a lot of nuance and a huge clash of culture and all kinds of things that are going on at one time. And at the same time, I could look if it was the opposite, if Iran flew a stealth bomber over U.S. soil and dropped a couple of 30,000-pound bombs to go after some kind of deep, secret nuclear program or whatever else, you know for a fact that America would be like, hell no, like we will do whatever it takes to get back. I mean, look at 9/11, right? 9/11, which was of course a horrible tragedy, launched us into a 10-year quote unquote war on terror. That was overwhelmingly not successful, but we still did it, right? And so I can understand how the fact that we just bombed a sovereign nation with a couple of 30,000-pound bombs, how that could potentially cause them to double, triple, quadruple down and say, screw this, we are going to do whatever we need to do to protect our people and our interests and our way of life, even if that means firing off a nuclear bomb if we can get our hands on one, right? So you can see how this could happen, because what we did certainly isn't going to try and quell the hornet's nest, so to speak.
Yeah. No, J.D. Vance made a comment that was like, we're not at war with Iran, we're at war with Iran's nuclear program, which imagine that somebody tried to say that about the United States. Imagine if somebody had come in and bombed the airfields in Missouri where we took off from in order to launch those weapons, and then said, well, we're not at war with America, we're at war with your... That's not going to fly. So I mean, the end result, I do think is in an Augustinian analysis. Like, I don't know, Iran is not a great actor. I don't know. I don't really want Iran with a nuclear weapon. I don't think that that's good. I think that the United States has gone in and done something that its own intelligence services didn't think needed to be done in order to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon. And I think that it's done that in part on the basis of a kind of particular ideology that's developed in Israel, and on the basis of the thought that this was an opportunity to do it, where they thought that the cost would be low. And as in all things with that, you have to see exactly where the dice fall at this point to see if that was a proper or improper calculation.
I want to segue while we have a few minutes left just into some of the theology. Now, we're going to do a part 2 on this. We have a great guest, Diana Butler-Bass, will be joining me probably on Thursday. We'll be releasing the episode, and we're going to dive in deep into the evangelical rapture theology and end of world, apocalyptic idealism of some of these people and some of the responses. But I do want to play one short clip. Now, this is Trump speaking shortly after this all happened on Saturday night, 10 o'clock Eastern. He went on TV, 4.5 minute long kind of briefing, but he made a very interesting comment. And then I want to get your thoughts. And by the way, can I just say, for those of you watching, can we all agree that Marco Rubio looks dead in the eyes? Like, that guy, his soul has left his body, which honestly, given how much of it he sold to be in this administration, I'm not surprised by. I'm just not. So I had to make that observation. All right, listen to what Trump says here during this press briefing, and then I'll kind of set up my question for you.
I'm at the Pentagon, and I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East, God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much.
Okay, so here's what's interesting to me. First off, he just said God bless the Middle East after he bombed it. Okay, that's kind of weird. Yeah. But I had to have this conversation briefly with you as we kind of get ready to segue into part 2. Do you think a lot of this is simply a religious war of sorts, where you have, one side that is heavily Muslim, right? That in some maybe even more extreme Muslim or more fundamentalist Muslim views, and then you have in America, we all know about Christian nationalism and how they think about places like Iran and other areas. And when Trump said that, "We love you, God," do you think that those watching in Iran are going to take that as religious warlike language of, okay, this is a war of gods, this is a war of which God is more superior, and so we're really in the middle of a spiritual battle, not just one that is about boundaries and alliances and geography? What's your take on that?
So some people in Iran will certainly take it that way, and the people who want to use it for propaganda will certainly use it that way. I mean, one of the things that this does is it allows Iran to cast this as this major existential war instead of a war about the access to particular weapons and a history of conflict in which there have been this tit for tat exchange across time, right? To make it a kind of existential fight that everybody wants to buy into. That will certainly be one of the ways that it plays out in Iran. Inside the United States, I think it's a combination of kind of 3 different things. One is exactly that strain in evangelicalism that identifies Iran with one of the powers of the end time, often putting it together with Russia and thinking that this is part of, they're playing a part in a play that's going on that already has its ending determined, in which they are going to win and come out on top. I think another strain of this is classical, like what was called neoconservatism, still back from when we invaded Iraq. There were neoconservatives under the Bush administration who thought of Iraq, Iran as these 2 evil powers that the United States, if the United States could go in and take them out, they could remake the Middle East into a place that would be accepting of Western values and would be a very positive thing for the United States. And you still find kind of neoconservatives who are not necessarily evangelicals, but think in terms of the United States expanding its power and taking out bad guys around the world as this has been one of their goals for a long time. And then I think you just have MAGA. And MAGA, I don't even know is a coherent ideology.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, I think it's just Trump's whim at any point. And I think Trump likes being in power. He likes showing power. He likes thinking of himself as a powerful person. And that this feeds into a particular narrative about him as a person. And I think what Trump is doing is he is sitting at the place where those three different lines come together. One, a kind of theory of international force from the neoconservatives, one, a theological belief, and the other just being Trump's own ego, which runs Trump in a particular direction. And I think he wants to adopt the language of evangelicalism at times. I think he wants to adopt the language of neoconservative at times. I don't think that Trump has any particular theology or ideology or like theory that he necessarily adopts himself, but he's perfectly willing to take advantage of the languages of those groups and to use those for building his own political power, which is ultimately his goal.
Kevin, I really appreciate you taking time out of your day last minute. I literally texted you yesterday. I was like, hey, dude, how do you feel about this? And you said yes, and you showed up and gave us a really helpful understanding of the ingredients that led us here and all of their complexity. So thank you so much for making time. If folks want to follow your work, where can they find you?
They can find me mostly on TikTok, but I'm also on Instagram. I've also got a Substack. If you Google, I appear. So yeah, follow me anyplace.
Awesome. Love it. Thanks again, Kevin. We'll talk soon. Thanks.